My son broke my finger when I refused to sign his wife's loan. I bit back tears, silent in the pain. The next morning he strutted into the bank, certain of victory. He handed over the papers with a smug grin, but when the screen flashed his fate in bold letters, he froze, as if turned to stone. Subscribe to our channel, Retaliation, for more true stories of courage and quiet revenge. I used to think motherhood was a lifetime guarantee of love. I carried Declan for 9 long months, working double shifts at a diner, saving every tip in a jar that rattled like a promise. I used to imagine the man he'd become kind, patient, grateful. Instead, I watched the promise twist into something sharper as the years went on. Declan met Marissa at a marketing conference in Dallas. She was quick, talking, always dressed like she'd just walked off a runway, and knew how to make anyone feel small with a smile. When they married, I told myself she'd mellow him out. I was wrong. She didn't soften him. She polished his edges until they could cut. After they moved into their new suburban home outside Austin, I'd visit on weekends. The first time I stepped into their kitchen, Marissa was already on her phone, showing Declan and houses worth investing in. I remember the way she looked at me, polite but dismissive, like I was a leftover piece of furniture they didn't need. "Mom, Marissa's thinking of starting her own design firm," Declan said, puffing his chest. "She just needs some startup capital." I smiled, setting down the casserole I'd made. "That sounds ambitious." Marissa's lips curled. "It's not ambition, Mrs. Reeves, it's strategy." From that day, the word strategy became her anthem. Every dinner turned into a pitch, every phone call a request, and every favor came with a timeline. When they asked me to sign a loan for a boutique space, I hesitated. They called it a simple signature, but it wasn't simple. I'd spent 40 years paying off my small house and keeping my credit spotless. The loan was enormous, a gamble, not an investment. A week before the incident, Marissa came by my place uninvited. She looked around my modest living room, her perfume overpowering the scent of coffee and old books. "You know," she said casually, "Declan, and really believes you'll do the right thing. He hates when you make him feel like a kid." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Silence has always been my first defense. When she left, I stared at the photo on my mantel. Declan at 10 years old, holding a fish he'd caught himself, grinning with pride. I whispered to that photo, "I raised you better than this." The following Friday, they invited me over for dinner, an ambush disguised as family time. Marissa cooked salmon with lemon butter, and Declan opened a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce. For the first half hour, everything was civil. Then Declan slid the papers across the table. "Mom," he said too softly, "just sign it." I looked at the figures, the interest rates, the debt already stacked behind the smile. "It's too risky." I said, "You're both already stretched thin." Marissa's fork clinked against her plate. "You don't trust us." "I'm protecting you," I replied. Declan's eyes darkened. Protecting us from what? Success. There was a pause, the kind that makes air heavy. Marissa leaned back, crossing her arms. "Maybe you're just jealous," she said under her breath. I stood to leave. I couldn't argue without saying something I'd regret. But Declan moved faster than my thoughts. His voice rose, sharp and desperate. "Sign it, Mom." I said no. I whispered. The moment that followed is one I still replay, not for the pain, but for what it revealed. I saw a flash of anger, a blur of movement, and then silence, the room filled with my breath, quick and uneven. When the shock passed, I looked down at my hand, trembling. Something inside me shifted, not the bone, but the trust. Declan's face went pale. Marissa gasped, then folded her arms again, muttering something about overreacting. He tried to apologize half-heartedly, but I was already walking toward the door. "I'll be fine," I said quietly. "Take care of yourselves." Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. My car keys slipped from my good hand twice before I managed to start the engine. I didn't cry until I pulled into my driveway, and even then it wasn't from pain. It was the realization that I had raised a man who had learned to take, not give. That night, I wrapped my hand and sat at my kitchen table under the yellow light. I stared at the checkbook, at the old file of documents from my late husband's estate, things Declan had never asked about. He'd always assumed I was poor, living on savings and sentiment. He was wrong. My husband had left me more than he ever knew: investments, property, quiet assets tucked away under my name alone. I had always kept them hidden, waiting for a reason worthy enough to use them. By morning, I had my reason. I called my banker, Mr. Harper, a man who'd known me since Declan was in grade school. I told him exactly what I wanted to do, and his only reply was, "Are you sure, Leilani?" I've never been more certain. When I arrived at the bank that afternoon, my hand was still bandaged, but my mind was clear. Mr. Harper handed me a folder. Inside were the documents that would quietly decide what happened next. I signed my name once slowly, firmly, the same way I used to sign permission slips when Declan was a boy. Then I closed the folder. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from Declan. "Sorry, Mom. We can fix this." Another, "I'll visit tomorrow." I didn't answer. I simply texted, "Good luck at the bank tomorrow." When I turned off the light, there was no anger left, only purpose. The lesson he would learn wasn't born of fury. It would come from truth, printed in black and white, glowing on a bank screen for everyone to see. And as I drifted to sleep, my hand throbbing softly under the bandage, I whispered into the dark, "You'll finally understand who you tried to break." When the morning sun filtered through my blinds, I felt something I hadn't in months: clarity. The pain in my hand had dulled overnight, but the ache in my chest hadn't. Still, I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away and left something cleaner behind: resolve. I dressed with care that morning. A cream blouse, a gray jacket, hair pulled back neatly. My reflection looked older, sterner, but alive. I picked up my small leather purse and slipped in 2 documents, one from my husband's trust and another, freshly signed by Mr. Harper. Before leaving, I glanced once at Declan's photo on the mantel. "Let's see what kind of man you really are," I whispered. By 10:30, the bank's lobby hummed with the sound of printers, murmured conversations, and the faint scent of coffee. I took a seat in the corner, half hidden behind a potted plant, as I watched my son stride in through the glass doors. He looked confident, almost radiant in his navy suit. Marissa followed beside him, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her red dress was too bold for a bank, but then again, she never did settle. They greeted the receptionist like royalty. "We're here for the loan processing," Declan announced, smiling as if he already owned the building. The young woman nodded politely. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Harper is expecting you. He'll be right with you." Declan turned to Marissa, smirking. "Told you it would go smooth. Mom finally did the right thing." Marissa laughed quietly, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. She should have just signed the first time. I watched them from my corner seat, my fingers tracing the edge of my bandage under the table. They didn't notice me. To them, I was invisible now, an afterthought, a weak-old woman who had finally given in. A few minutes later, Mr. Harper emerged from his office, holding a tablet and a stack of folders. His eyes found mine instantly. A small nod passed between us. Then he turned to my son. "Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Reeves." He greeted warmly. "Let's step into my office." They followed him eagerly. I stood quietly and walked toward the door behind them. As I entered, Declan turned, surprised. "Mom?" His brow furrowed. "What are you?" Mr. Harper raised a hand gently. "Mrs. Reeves is here because she's an involved party in this transaction." Marissa's smile faltered. "Wait, I thought she already signed." Mr. Harper took his seat, calm as a lake. "She did sign, yes, but not what you think." The air shifted. Declan glanced at me, suspicion flaring. "What does that mean, Mr.?" Harper tapped his tablet, turning the screen toward them. "Mrs. Reeves signed to transfer her late husband's trust fund, approximately $2, $8 million, into a new account under her sole management. As of this morning, she has also revoked the shared authorization your name once held on her savings." Silence. Declan blinked. Marissa's mouth dropped open. What do you mean revoked?" Declan stammered. Mr. Harper's tone remained professional. "It means, Mr. Reeves, that your mother's accounts, properties, and assets are legally beyond your access. Permanently." I sat down across from them, my voice steady. "You thought I'd sign your loan. Instead, I secured my independence." Declan's face turned red. "Mom, you can't do this. We're family. Family doesn't break bones over money," I said softly. Marissa leaned forward, desperate. You don't understand. That boutique was our future. I met her eyes. No, it was your scheme. You've been draining my son dry with one failed venture after another. And Declan. I turned to him. You let her. He slammed his palm on the desk. You don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Harper's voice cut through. Mr. Reeves, I'd advise you to calm down. Declan leaned back, shaking his head, his confidence crumbling. You can't just. What about the loan? The system will tell you, Mr. Harper replied, please check your status. Declan snatched his phone, opening the bank app. I watched his face as the numbers loaded. Then it appeared. The message he didn't expect. Loan application denied. Applicant flagged for pending financial review due to insufficient collateral and revoked guarantor. His fingers froze on the screen. The smugness drained from his face. What is this? He whispered. I leaned forward slightly. That's your fate in bold letters. Marissa's voice broke. You tricked us. I smiled faintly. No, I protected myself. There's a difference. Declan's jaw trembled, anger and confusion twisting together. You're punishing me for one mistake. One mistake. I repeated, my voice sharp for the first time. You didn't just hurt me, Declan. You broke the hand that fed you your whole life. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling vent. Finally, Mr. Harper cleared his throat. If that's all, I believe we're done here. Declan didn't move. His phone screen dimmed in his hand. Marissa looked away, blinking rapidly. I stood, my pulse calm, and adjusted my jacket. Goodbye, Declan. I said quietly. I hope one day you'll remember the woman who tried to save you. He didn't answer. I left the office and stepped out into the sunlight. It felt warm on my face like forgiveness. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, free. On my way home, I stopped by a cafe I hadn't visited in years. I ordered tea, sat by the window, and let the quiet fill me. For the first time, I realized revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through dignity, and mine had spoken clearly enough. The call came 2 days later. I was in my garden, pruning the roses, when my phone buzzed. The screen showed Declan's name. For a moment, I just looked at it, remembering how, not long ago, I used to drop everything when he called. Now I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, he said, his voice tight. You need to come to the house. Something in his tone told me this wasn't about remorse. It was panic. What's wrong? I asked. There was a pause, then a breath that almost sounded like a sob. The bank froze our accounts. I didn't speak. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Mom, please, he said, frustration rising. They're saying something about an internal review. They won't even let me access the mortgage payments, Declan. I said quietly, you might need to talk to a financial advisor. I can't help you. You can't or you won't. His words hit harder than he knew, but I kept my voice steady. Sometimes they're the same thing. He swore under his breath. Marissa's furious. She says this is your fault. I smiled faintly to myself. Of course she does. When I hung up, I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, watching the sunlight glint off the garden shears. I didn't feel satisfaction, not exactly. It was more like justice had quietly taken its place at the table. By the end of that week, the whispers had started. Our town wasn't large, and word traveled fast, especially about money. The couple who once bragged about their next big investment were now the subject of sympathetic smiles and polite gossip. Marissa stopped showing up at the boutique. Declan started coming home later and later, face drawn, tie loosened, shoulders slumped. I saw him once from across the street. He didn't notice me. He was arguing with Marissa in their driveway, his gestures sharp, hers cold. The house that once blazed with light now looked dim, tired, and then came the foreclosure notice. A friend at the post office told me she'd seen the envelope official seal heavy paper. I didn't gloat. I didn't even tell anyone. I just folded a letter I'd been writing, placed it in my drawer, and sat in silence for a while. That evening, Declan showed up at my door. No call, no warning. He looked exhausted. His suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Mom, can we talk? I opened the door wider, gesturing for him to come in. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit. He dropped into the armchair across from mine, rubbing his face with both hands. It's all gone, he said flatly. The bank took the car, the house is next, and Marissa. He laughed bitterly. Marissa's packing her bags. I folded my hands in my lap. I see. He looked up sharply. That's all you have to say. What would you like me to say? That you'll help me, he burst out. You're my mother. You have money sitting in those accounts. You could fix this with one phone call. I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. The same way I could have fixed your wife's loan, the one you nearly broke my hand for. His jaw tightened. That was different. How? I asked softly, because this time the pain's yours. He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, his breath ragged. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you. I closed my eyes. Meaning doesn't undo what's done. He leaned forward, desperation flickering in his eyes. Mom, please, I've got nothing left. I'm staying at a friend's place. I'll do anything. Just help me get back on my feet. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. But sometimes love has to stand still to be heard. Declan, I said quietly, you need to learn what it means to build something without taking it from someone else. Until then, my answer is no. He stared at me, his expression hardening again. You'll regret this. I already have, I said. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back slightly. Then, without another word, he walked out. I didn't cry, not that night, not the next. But 3 nights later, when I found one of his childhood drawings tucked in an old box, 2 stick figures holding hands under the words me and Mom, I sat on the floor and finally let the tears fall. I thought revenge would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like silence. Weeks passed. The house across town was sold, Marissa disappeared into another city, and Declan took a job at a warehouse, according to a friend who still saw him sometimes. I didn't reach out, not yet, but I watched. Every month, I'd see his name on a deposit slips. Small amounts, like pebbles dropped in a bucket. He was trying in his own way, and though I told myself I didn't care, I found I still checked, quietly hoping. Then one morning a letter came, no return address, just my name in his handwriting. Inside was a single line. I understand now, Mom. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers trembling just slightly. That night, I placed the note beside the one I'd written weeks before. The one that began, if you ever find your way back to humility, you'll find my door open. And for the first time in months, I slept without waking from the ache in my hand. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about balance, and maybe, just maybe, it was finally being restored. It had been almost a year since the letter. The seasons had rolled by quietly. Summer fading to autumn, the roses sleeping through winter, then waking again with the first warm breeze. I'd grown used to solitude, the rhythm of tea in the morning, books by the window, and soft music humming through the house. One afternoon, while trimming the garden hedge, I heard a car stop at the curb. The sound startled me. Few people ever came by unannounced. When I looked up, Declan was standing there. He was thinner. His hair, once styled with vanity, now brushed loosely over his forehead. His clothes were plain, but it was his eyes that caught me, clearer, quieter, almost humbled. Hi, Mom. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every unsaid apology between us. I didn't answer right away. I just wiped my hands on my gloves and said softly, You look tired. He smiled faintly. Work's different now. Honest work, though. I nodded. That's good. He hesitated, glancing at the porch steps. Can I come in? I stepped aside without a word. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. He looked around as if seeing it for the first time, the framed photographs, the quiet light, the space that had once been his home. He sat down carefully at the kitchen table. I poured us tea. For a while, we said nothing, just the sound of spoons clinking softly against porcelain. Finally, he spoke. I didn't just come to say I'm sorry. I looked up. I came to tell you I get it now, he continued. What you meant about building something without taking it from someone else. I was blind, Mom, angry at everyone but myself. I let out a slow breath. That's part of growing up, realizing how much of the mess is our own making. He nodded. I didn't think I'd ever have the courage to face you again. You did, I said gently, and that counts for something. He smiled weakly. I don't expect forgiveness. I already gave it, I said, the day you sent that letter. His eyes widened slightly. You kept it. I rose and opened the small wooden box by the window. Inside lay 2 folded notes, his and mine. I handed him both. He unfolded the one I'd written, the words soft with age. If you ever find your way back to humility, you'll find my door open. He looked up, his voice breaking. You meant this, I did. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood and came around the table. His hands hesitated before lightly touching mine, the same hand he'd once hurt. It was healed now, a faint scar, the only memory. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Maybe not, I said softly, but you're still my son. Tears rolled silently down his cheeks. We sat there for hours, talking about small things, work, the weather, memories of when he was young. There was laughter, awkward at first, then real. By the time the sun dipped low outside, the air between us had changed, fragile but warm. When he left that evening, he turned on the porch and said, I'll come by again if that's okay. I smiled. It's more than okay. He drove off down the quiet street, and I stood there long after the taillights disappeared. That night, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the old photographs, the steady heartbeat of the place I'd built. My life had been tested, broken, and mended like that finger, like that bond. As I looked out the window at the moonlit garden, I thought about all the women who'd been told to stay silent, to endure, to forgive without power. So I'll tell you this: if you've ever been hurt by those you love, don't rush your healing. Let your silence teach. Let your dignity speak louder than revenge. Because sometimes the quietest retaliation is simply becoming stronger than the pain that tried to break you. And that's what I did.